go look into automotive security in general and also at these aftermarket devices specifically, which we'll be talking about most of tonight. And somewhere around here is that white paper we just released actually yesterday that has more detail. It's right there. If you're technical, you may find it rather boring. It's more geared toward governments, fleet managers, manufacturers, that kind of thing, sort of best practices. Here's common vulnerabilities. So if you want to get into bits and bytes, it will be a little boring for you. Okay, so that's who CERT is. Who am I? Vulnerability researcher at CERT. Before this position, about a year ago, I had built a red team for a government agency that I'm not supposed to say. And so they did red teaming and penetration testing nationwide against critical infrastructure, government agencies, etc. Before that, I worked at a place called Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California. They created some software that you might have heard of, like TCP dump, things. I co-founded B-Sides Pittsburgh, which John is now one of the organizers of, and I'm very appreciative that people who are better organized than me are now organizing. So, good job, John. Which is coming up on June 10th, so watch out for the tickets. I wrote some 3D visualization tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning. All right, we all have advance notice besides Pittsburgh tickets on sale. Sale tomorrow morning. Perfect. So I wrote some visualization software, which is depicted up here. I made a movie that probably only 3 people ever saw called Hack the Wars a couple years ago here in Pittsburgh, and I built some CTFs that teams from around the globe have competed in. Usually once a year we do something like that. All right, fun stuff, cars. Okay, so probably comes as no surprise to anyone that at this point, cars are code. They're basically computers on wheels. Tesla seems to be the only car company that has actually acknowledged this, but it's the truth. So if you look down, the interesting thing is this little red circle down here at the bottom. A modern luxury car has somewhere around 100 million lines of code. I've heard just in the last few weeks that that's like 150 million. So it's on par with modern advanced operating systems. And the interesting thing is, I don't know if you can read this down here, but the bottom one is a mouse. And 120 million is the total DNA base pairs in the genome of a mouse. So I'm not entirely sure how good of an analogy that is, or in comparison. I think it might be apples to oranges, but you could say that a car is almost as complicated as a mouse in some way. All right, so there's lots of ways to get into cars. It's probably surprising to know. How many people have seen the GPAC video on Wired? Yeah, okay. So there's a whole bunch of ways to try to get into cars. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular, tire pressure monitoring system was shown maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So you might not realize that your wheels have radios that are talking to the inside of the car to say what your tire pressure is, and somebody used those radio waves to hack inside the car a couple of years ago. Sensor exploitation is kind of an emerging thing that we're just starting to look at. So like the crash detection, collision detection, radar is sticking, firing radar out the front of your car. We're looking into ways of spoofing radar signals back to see if we can cause cars to decelerate when there's nothing there, that kind of thing. So that's another possible avenue of attack. A similar thing has been done already where satellite radio, people embedded basically malicious payloads into satellite radio and fed it down to the radio in the car and attack it that way. And then of course devices, smartphones in the car can be used to attack the car, and our miscreants for tonight, the OBD-II devices. So these are the devices we're going to be talking about mostly tonight. So OBD-II is a small port in your car, which is required by law. It's been required since 1996. It's usually kind of under the driver's footwell. And all these devices will plug into that port. You can maybe see the pins there on the end. And the reason that they exist is so that you can connect to the car and send requests for what are called diagnostic trouble codes, which, just like they sound, are codes that tell you what may or may not be wrong with your car. Engine warning lights, the amount of oxygen in the airflow, things like that. So this worked really good when they used to be wired and only USB, because really only hobbyists and mechanics had them, and you had to actually be able to get in the car first to be able to access it. But over the last couple of years, increasingly we're seeing these having Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, GPS, cellular, all kinds of things. And by law, the car has to respond if one of these things is plugged in, so it's not like it can just ignore them. at least if it's gas pump. I'm told by somebody at Tesla that Teslas have the port because it's required to have the port, but all the pins are actually really not wired to anything. So you might be thinking, okay, well these things like, all right, some car hobbyists might buy these to, watch their gas mileage or something like that. So, what's the risk? It might be a few thousand people, but Progressive Insurance is now offering people cheaper insurance if they put one of these on their cars. The idea being if you put one of these in, they can monitor how fast you drive, how far you drive, and potentially you get lower insurance rates if you drive well. I'm not sure how many people have actually examined what savings they get from putting one of these in. That's what they advertise. Uber, for its drivers, gives something called Metro Mile that you're required to put in at least while you're driving for Uber, and that way they can pay for the insurance only while you're actually driving Uber clients. Both of those devices have been found to be vulnerable to various attacks, relatively simple attacks. They're being used by fleet management now, so I'm going to talk about one later that was being procured for the federal government. But lots of large fleets, the federal government, UPS, FedEx, are putting these in cars in order to monitor where the cars are, how their drivers are going, etc. Consumers, of course, are interested in just checking their gas mileage, seeing if they're actually getting what they're supposed to be getting, that kind of thing. And of course, professional mechanics would rather use something that has Bluetooth or Wi-Fi than use something where they have to plug in USB to. So with all those different markets, we're talking tens of millions of these deployed at least already, and that's only going to go up. So the problem is that anything that's plugged into this OBD-II port in your car can listen to all of the traffic. It's called CAN traffic. We're going to go into details on that, but it can listen to all the traffic on your car's CAN network. And not only can it listen to it, but it can write to it. In fact, getting these diagnostic trouble codes requires you to send a request for the information you want, like what's the current RPM of the engine, and then you'll get that information back. So a lot of people that are selling these are out there saying, well, this is read-only. It only displays information about the car. That might be the intended use, but the truth is there is no such thing as read-only on the OBD-II port. You have to be able to send messages to it to get information back. And so I'm kind of stretching an analogy here in the last point, but once you plug one of these in a way, you really do have root access to the vehicle. Now, there may be other networks that you can't necessarily access immediately from that port and things. But once you've got one of these plugged in, you have read-write access, and most of the time, safety systems like door locks, air conditioning, are all going to be on CAN networks. So you have a great deal of access to the vehicle once you can communicate to its bus. So I want to talk a little bit about the CAN protocol for a minute, and it's probably going to scare you a little bit. So it's a really simple serial protocol. Most of these devices use the AT command set. So yeah, I had to brush off my memory and try to remember back to the Hayes modems and try to remember what the AT command set was when I started doing this. So it's really simple. Send serial and a bunch of hexadecimal, but it's in ASCII, so it's really easy. The format's pretty simple. As you can see on here, there's a CAN identifier, a length, and data, which can only go up to 8 bytes, so we're not talking about something super complicated or high bandwidth type of thing here. So the interesting thing is you see the CAN identifier. What that is the identifier of the control unit in the car that is responsible for handling that message. There is no source to know where the message came from. So if I'm, say, some sort of collision avoidance system that automatically puts on the brakes, just any message that has my destination address, my CAN identifier, I respond to. I have no way of knowing whether that actually came from the radar or if it came from the OBD-II port or anywhere else, because there is no source identifier. So if you're familiar with TCP and UDP and things like this, this is probably going to scare you. There's a couple examples down here at the bottom. We'll get more into this later. But so this top example, you'll see the CAN identifier at the beginning is 7BF8. It says it's 8 bytes of data. I just knocked off all the remaining zeros at the end of this. The 01 is the diagnostic trouble code mode, and the 00 just says, show me all diagnostic trouble codes that you support. So the response to this, and we'll see an example of it later, would just be a message that says that the binary lists all of the diagnostic trouble codes that the car is willing to apply to. Another interesting one, So this one, the CAN identifier 7E4 is the battery control unit in a 2013 Chevy Volt, which I'll be talking a little bit more about here in a minute. Again, 8 bytes. I locked off the last 4, but these 4 bytes are requesting the current amps, current meaning now, not current as in of the battery in the volt. If I change that last byte to 68, it requests the current volts. So you can see this is a really simple protocol. And there are other more complicated protocols that are sometimes built on top of it. But this is the basics of what runs your car, all those 100 million lines of code. So here's another example, and this is just like a 1/100th of a second of a live capture with the codes translated so that you can see some of the things that you might measure with these. So, thousands of times a second, you can bus throughout the car seeing these kinds of messages. What's the airflow rate, what's the vehicle speed, etc. This is an example of actually communicating with one of these devices. I can't remember which one. It might be this cheap one that John was talking about earlier, which drops like 80% of the packets. But so what I did here is I connected to one of these devices just via terminal in Linux or something. Just a serial protocol. This top message is just, it's an AT command, it's just, that's information check or something, that just gives me the version of the firmware. This next command is an abbreviated version of what I showed on the previous slide, where I just am saying, okay, ETC mode 1, and then give me all codes that you support. Now this looks like a pretty short reply to that. With 41, DTCs automatically add 40 to the mode that you requested so that you know what it's replying to. And then the 00 is the message that we're replying to, which is the request for all things. And this might look like a pretty small amount of information to tell you all the DTCs because there's dozens and dozens of them, but that's hex. So you're talking about actually 4 bytes of data, so it's the size of a IPv4 address. So it's what, 16 million different possibilities. So for each diagnostic trouble code, the bit is either on or not loaded across the port set. Next command I did here is MA is monitor all, which is a little bit of a misnomer. You might think that that's like promiscuous mode on a network interface and you're going to see every single CAN packet. What it really means is that your device is going to show anything that is addressed to that device. So there's other things you have to do to actually see every packet. But that would just result in thousands of lines of stuff that we didn't know. Next command, I'm setting the header to, this is the 74 that we saw on the previous, or 2 slides before, which is the battery controller in the volt. Set header just means set the CAN ID. AT command for that. And then finally, I actually issue the CAN command. If you're paying close attention, you realize that's the same CAN command we saw 2 slides ago. And then I get a whole bunch of these back, which, interpreted properly, one of those shows the current of the battery. The rest show a whole bunch of other information. And I cut this off. There was, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 lines of those kinds of things that came back. And when you want to know what those are, that's where this comes in. They're all listed in this, and what they mean and what they are. This is 1 volume of the 4-volume service manual, which costs us about $400. So it's not cheap to interpret that stuff, but it's also not, super proprietary or anything like that.
Is that manufacturer specific or is that universal?
It's not only manufacturer specific, but model specific.
Oh my God.
So that's the 2013 Chevy Volt. Okay. 2012 would be different. Yes.
Oh, so like every car has a different. Oh wow.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later. One second, John. But this is actually sort of security for cars at the moment. It's kind of the security by obscurity, because if you want to reverse engineer a whole bunch of different kinds of makes and models, you're going to have a lot of dollars into these kind of manuals because they all are somewhat different. Even different models between a manufacturer and even different years may not respond to CAN commands the same way.
Did you look into how much they differ? If it's very minor things or esoteric functions that you might not use frequently, and the core ones are the same, or?
So, from what I've seen, is within the manufacturer, most of the common stuff will remain the same, like to get the engine speed, to unlock the doors, things like that. We'll look at examples of some of these in a little bit. Obviously there's going to be differences between models, especially if we're talking about a Chevy Volt here. It's got electric batteries and stuff that most cars don't have. So it seems like manufacturers try to stick to their own thing throughout their line, but obviously the latest model Chevy whatever is going to have functionality that wasn't in their latest sedan. Won't have the same thing that was in their pickup truck from 3 years ago. So we'll talk about that too, and how there's an evolving risk as people start sort of figuring out the standards across different models and manufacturers. I'll give you a spoiler of the later part of the talk and say I'm basically expecting to see that there will be exploit kits being released. Somebody in one place reverse engineers a Chevy Volt, somebody else does a Toyota or whatever, and releases it on the internet. Eventually they can package exploits for different kinds of cars.
I was reading a couple weeks ago the guy who got his Alexa to start his GM vehicle. I don't know if you saw that article, but anyway, he said that GM uses single wire CAN, I think, or single CAN versus the rest of the industry doesn't.
Right.
Are you going to go into that at all? Or?
I was not going to.
Okay.
So on the OBD-II connector, there are 16 pins, and a lot of those are protocols. Some of them are required, like CAN. There is something called single wire CAN, which, from what I understand, so there's high-speed CAN, there's low-speed CAN, there's single wire CAN, which I believe does both high and low speed. And if anybody is a car expert wants to correct me on that, feel free. There's also pins for GM LAN, which is their custom proprietary protocol. Okay. There are proprietary protocols that run over CAN. There's some old protocol called K-line that has to be supported still. Is there a question in the back?
So
yes.
There are really no standards.
The only standards there are really is that they must support CAN and a few other older protocols, and they must do diagnostic trouble codes. So when I did the 0-1 mode, 0-0 request DTCs, that's the standard that everybody by law in the US has to follow. Besides that,
are there any organizations that actively
Yeah, so the Society for Automotive Engineering, the SAE, publishes standards and recommended best practices and things, and we're actually working with them now to try to come up with security recommendations for the OBD-II port. So I would like to say it's going to get better, but at this point, yeah, it's very scattered. Manufacturers do a lot of their own. So this is a little bit of a rehash of what we saw before, but this is kind of a quick little image of car networks. The takeaway from this is there's a whole bunch of ways in, there's a whole bunch of ECUs, which are electronic control units in the car, and there's a whole bunch of networks which may or may not talk to each other. So let's talk about that in a little more depth. So we just kind of covered this, that was a good segue. There's the CAN protocol, which is required in all cars in the US. There are also many proprietary protocols like GM LAN, and pretty much every manufacturer is going to have their own proprietary protocols. The ECUs are the electronic control units, and there will be like an engine ECU, a battery ECU in the Volt, an ECU for the air conditioning, etc. And the thing about the car is if you're used to working with a PC that has peripherals or even a client-server environment, there's no central brain in the car. All of these ECUs, all they know is if I get X message, I respond in Y way. So there's no master that's trying to make sense of why is this ECU sending this message to that other ECU? That doesn't make any sense. So the ECUs kind of have to all do it themselves, which currently they don't. There are other networks besides CAN and serial networks that are starting to be used. WIN is pretty well established. FlexRay and Automotive Ethernet are still kind of in their infancy, and the industry is starting to standardize some things, so they're still being deployed. I don't really know that there's any production cars that run FlexRay or Automotive Ethernet yet. And IVI down here, that's the in-vehicle infotainment unit. So you might be thinking, okay, it's just a radio, whatever. But nowadays, that is far more than just the radio. It's the nav system, which requires GPS. It's almost certainly every car that's being sold as like a 2016 model has a cellular modem in it. Even if they don't actually offer you any services over that, there's one in there to help the manufacturers, if nothing else. And everybody wants their little entertainment system to be able to tell them like what their miles per gallon are, and what their current speed is, and things like that. So it has to be connected into the CAN bus to be able to talk to the ECUs and get that raw data. So I'm sure you're thinking already, okay, cellular modem on one side, connected to the CAN bus on the other side. What could possibly go wrong? Within the cars, sometimes there are actually gateways between different chunks of CAN networks. So sometimes like safety critical systems will be separated out from like driver convenience, things like air conditioning, things like that. Sometimes not, but like any computer network, you run into these places where there are unexpected interactions in those. So for example, in the airbag system, when airbags go off, it's common behavior for cars to automatically unlock the doors because they figure you're going to crash, you're going to want to get out of the car. Well, that means that if you're able to compromise the CAN network that the airbags are on, now you are allowed to send a message to unlock the doors. So that might not be what the manufacturer intended. And one thing that makes this really hard is the car manufacturers, I will say, are struggling. There are a lot of legal requirements that make it hard to secure the car. So we talked about the fact that the OBD-II port is required in the US. Also, not only do you need to be able to read these diagnostic values off of the car, but by law you have to allow consumers and mechanics to update the firmware on whatever ECU controls of emissions and gas mileage type things. If they've seen software that's being sold as, you can improve your gas mileage, or you can get better acceleration at the price of worse gas mileage, or things like that. And it's law, federal law, that manufacturers have to allow you to do that. So now, not only can you write data by law on the OBD-II report, but you can update firmware on at least one ECU by law. So it's not like the manufacturers can just have, at least for the emissions ECU, they can't have signed firmware and say, okay, if you put in another firmware on the car, it's just going to not start or something. And then last is the right to tinker, which is various stages of legal permissions, I guess. Throughout the US, I understand that Massachusetts has the most liberal, but this basically means that car mechanics should be allowed to do things to their own cars, even if it's something incredibly stupid that's going to cause the car to crash. So it used to be, putting bigger engines in. Now it includes being able to modify the computers in the car to do what you want. So that's, the car manufacturers can't do anything about that except push back on the policy if they think that's the right thing to do. I'm not going to get into policy. All right, so now we get to these cool little devices. So this is our victim. We have a Chevy Volt that's sitting a few blocks away up on CMU campus there. One sunny day a few weeks ago, I pulled it out in the parking lot, took a picture of it with my laptop and stuff on it. This was graciously loaned to us by the Department of Transportation, and in turn loaned to them by the Canadian Department of Transportation. So later on, you'll see some messages coming across the arrow in kilometers and stuff, and that's why it's Canadian Volt. And we understand that they're just going to crush it when they get it back, so I don't feel too bad about what they're to it. These are our contestants in our competition to see who is the least secure of these devices. And we're going to go through a few of these in a little more detail. I want to quickly mention at the bottom there's a development device. What this was is the federal government was looking to buy potentially hundreds of thousands of devices. We worked with the manufacturer and the provider and stuff ahead of time to identify any security problems and go ahead and get those fixed and stuff. And so the agreement was we would not publish their names, since those were all published before they actually got into cars. So they were actually really good to work with. They really wanted to find security problems before they sold 100,000 units. Probably a smart idea. And then generic, John was talking about this a little bit before, but I have this one device here. So you can get a ton of these with different names and stuff off of eBay or Amazon or Alibaba or something like that. They come with different names. They all are pretty much the same. They're very cheap, very simple, have virtually no security. So I just lump them all in as generic. This happens to be the one that I examined, but I know that most of them are very much like this. So rather than call out like this specific brand name, I just lump them all in together in a category. So this is an example of an app you would see. This is actually goes with the device that's in my car right now. And this is the iPhone app, but this is the kinds of information that you would typically see by an app that uses these kind of things. don't know how we can read that, especially from the back, but there's the miles per hour, the engine temperature, the airflow, RPM of the engine, fuel rate, battery. That's the actual regular car battery that's in every car, not the Volts battery, which is a totally different thing. An example of a desktop app just does the same thing. All these apps, all they're doing is they're connecting to the device and they're sending these codes, these CAN codes that we've been talking about to get this information back. So this is just an example. You can probably tell from the design of the window and stuff here that this software is not super up to date. It looks like XP version 1 maybe. So later on, if we want, we can either potentially I can bring my car over here and I can actually connect and show you these. Although it's really going to show the same screens. It's just there's going to be values on them. Or I can show you some more screenshots too. But this is what you're supposed to do with these things. But we don't want to do what we're supposed to do. So we kind of came up with a few different attack vectors to try out. One thing is the fact that all of these have some sort of radio connection. We didn't bother testing USB ones because we have to actually break into the car first before we can use the cable in. So all of these have some sort of Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular, or SMS, which is over cellular, but not data per se. And of course you can attack them via the app. So I just showed you the screenshot of the app. If I can compromise that app somehow, like make I can make someone download an update to the app that has my own malicious code in it, and then send malicious things to the car. Compromise device, even if I can't compromise the app itself, if I can compromise the phone that's in the car that you're using, when it connects via Bluetooth to the device, then I can just send raw commands to the device. And reverse attacks is things that I made up for attacking mobile devices in the car. So if you've already managed to get access to one of these plug-in devices, can you then attack a cell phone or a laptop or something that's being used in the car? And at least one example here in a slide or two, the answer is yes. So these were kind of the things that we tested out. A little quick information about how these things work. So this is my cheapo $10 one. It's definitely the simplest. And really this is just OBD-II on the right, shows the picture, which goes to a CAN controller that interprets the CAN messages because it has to do timing a certain way and things like that. And it just sends those messages out to a serial port over Bluetooth. I mean, there is no intelligence in this to say, wow, I really shouldn't pass that particular message onto the car or anything like that. It's just a pass-through. So the only security you're likely to have on these devices, especially the simpler or cheaper ones, is whatever security happens to be on the radio. If it's Bluetooth, what's the PIN, if it's Wi-Fi, what's the appreciated key, etc. So first we looked at Wi-Fi. I've got, I don't know if I have a Wi-Fi one here. It's in my car right now, Wi-Fi. So the worst pre-shared key I found was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That was actually the Wi-Fi version of this. This is the Bluetooth one, but Wi-Fi version, yeah, it took 10 seconds of Googling and I found out that it's hard-coded with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I mean, literally, I got one of these devices and within like half an hour I had basically root access in my car. It was kind of scary. Slightly better is this, I think this is the Verizon dongle. So it had a unique Wi-Fi password per each device, which was good. At first I looked at this and I said, oh, that's 4 bytes. I wonder if it's like the IP address or something like that, or part of a MAC address. I couldn't actually find any logical way that they assigned that. But even so, when you've got uppercase letters, only 8 digits, and numbers, you know, with good password cracking these days, I calculated that would take maybe a couple days to crack those. So it's not like your drive-by kind of attack, but if you actually really wanted to get into one of these devices, it wouldn't take very long. Best I saw is this one, which is the one that's on my car, because it's the secure one on my car. And so that's a pretty good password, right? It's unique per device, and it's a little bit weak because I discovered that, you know, these are all hexadecimal numbers, so you only have A through E and 1 through 0 as possibles, and these dots are in the same place all the time. So there's really only 12 characters instead of 14, 15 characters because you know where the dots are. But I didn't try to crack it, but I ran some math and it was saying that I could crack it, but it would take anywhere from like a couple years on a really high-end GPU cluster to decades. So I figure that's pretty secure. If someone wants to do my car that bad, probably something else they can do, right? The one concern that I had with this last one is that you can, instead of, it currently runs as, by default as an access point. So you turn the thing on, it shows OBD link, whatever, you pair your phone to it, do your thing, this will be a long passcode. But you can also tell it to pair to an existing Wi-Fi network as a client with a pre-shared key on. And my guess is that they think you might use this for like mechanics in garages. So if you've got Wi-Fi in your garage, you just pre-program these things to connect to that. Every time you get a new car in, you just plug it in, it connects to your Wi-Fi network. Done. My concern is that somebody might decide to pair it to a mobile hotspot in their car, whether it's on the in-vehicle infotainment system, or whether it's on the phone or whatever. And you know, we all know how good passwords people usually choose, right? And they're not going to be like this. They might not be that bad, but they're not going to be that. So I think one of the most likely attacks for this is if somebody decides to go ahead and just pair it permanently to a hotspot in their car, that somebody would attack that Wi-Fi hotspot. Basically undo the security you get from this nice password. But maybe I'm just paranoid. Okay, so the Delphi Connect, which you guys are pretty sure is this one. So let's assume it looks red. Yeah, that's Verizon. Okay. So this one was kind of interesting. We logged into the Wi-Fi access point, which was this password. Logged into that. I ran Nmap on the device from my laptop and found there were a couple of ports open on 8853. And port 80 contains the admin app for the Wi-Fi hotspot that's built into that device. I had the same default password as the pre-shared key itself, which was kind of nice. You didn't have to Google for that. So once you're there, you basically have control of the hotspot, which allows you to attack any devices that happen to connect to that hotspot and change the DNS and the routing and all that kind of thing. But it didn't give me any access to the actual car, the OBD. This was only basically a router that took a mobile hotspot, passed your traffic out the cellular modem, and got it back. It didn't have any path, any network path to the OBD-II port. So the next thing I did is I looked for vulnerabilities in the web app and the HTTP and DNS servers themselves to see if there was any way that I could get into the firmware underneath those to access the serial port. And I didn't find anything. I did get the IP address from the admin interface, so the global IP address out on the internet on Verizon's network. Ran Nmap against that, which by the way takes forever. But the only thing that I got back was a ping code. So I had the right IP address, but there was no port still there. Firmware and the app updates were both signed. Didn't find any vulnerabilities in the app, so at that point I was like, okay, well if somebody has this, I can probably own any device that connects to their access point in their car, but I can't really do anything with the car itself, so I'll play safe. So this is the development device I was talking about. We were asked to take a look at this. First thing I did was go out and find the documentation, like look up the FCC ID, and on the FCC's website they usefully included the user manual for the device, which told me a lot about it. And just Googling around, I found a few other documents, like an API for the programming language and things like that. So it was kind of funny when we talked to them. They were like, well, we can give you the user manual and the API and stuff, but you'll have to sign an NDA first. I didn't have the heart to tell them that I'd already found it with like 2 minutes of Googling. So then we found, if you look down here, there was a couple pins on the side that looked like they would take a connector or something. So I don't know if anybody ever used a JTagulator. Okay, so we plugged a JTagulator onto that, ran it, told us a couple of the pins were the serial connection. Connected to the serial port with these little clips. And that was super useful. We couldn't actually send any messages to it over the serial port, but it gave us tons of debugging information. As you boot it up, you could see it connected to the cellular network, like what password it used to connect into the cellular data, the IP address, all that kind of stuff. Again, the IP was blocked. I tried to Nmap it, tried to ping it. I couldn't get anything from that IP address. But it also told me that there was a phone number. I'm like, oh, all right, let's see if I can text it. Sure enough, I get a message back from texting my car. So between trial and error with my phone and reading through the documentation that I found on the website, I found that regardless of getting hacking the car, I could just send SMS messages with no authentication or anything, and it would send me back the coordinates of the car, its current heading, speed, altitude. I could configure everything about the device, like which management server it reported back to, what the password was, etc. I could trigger certain OBD-II commands. I'll talk about that in just a second. And, best of all, I could initiate an update of the firmware from an arbitrary URL. So, send a text, give it a URL in the text. It went out automatically, tried to grab its new firmware, download it, install it, reboot, and run with the new firmware. Well, okay, so I got it to do the existing, I just took a copy of the firmware that I had already downloaded, put it on my own web server, told it to download that. That worked fine. But it was the same firmware. So the next thing was the firmware signed. Nope. Just the CRC 16 code, which took actually an unfortunate amount of time for us to figure out. But so it's a checksum. So as long as we changed it and then changed it so it's a checksum matched, we could customize the firmware however we wanted, put the right checksum in, we would download it and accept it as correct. So at this point I can send a text message to it, tell it to download firmware from my web server, and the firmware is stuff that I made and I put the CRC code on, so it can do basically whatever I want it to do. We can go a whole lot farther with this, but we used IDA to disassemble the ARM firmware. It turns out that it's running along. That's an ARM chip, so we use that to disassemble it. And the one good thing is that by default, it does not just send any serial traffic onto the CAN bus like most of these do. So it's got this pre-configured list of diagnostic trouble codes that you send it a message and say, hey, I want to do secondary air system monitor. And then it figures out what the CAN command should be and sends it on. So I can't just send arbitrary CAN commands. But now I can change the firmware, right? So I can find out where this points to. So this is from the IDA element. I can find out where that points to and go change what CAN commands that's actually sending. So the next time I send a message to it saying, look up RPM, it can be like throwing brakes. So that was fun. They were pretty happy that we figured this stuff out before they deployed it. But it was an easy fix too, right? All they had to do is there was already the ability to put a password on the SMS thing so that somebody can't just randomly start texting your car and shit.
So did they sign the firmware after that?
To the best of my knowledge, the firmware is not yet signed. I don't know that for sure.
On the bright side, it's an easy upgrade path to the same firmware.
Yes, right. I mean, they could have, and the fact that they can do over-the-air updates, and in fact it checks for updated firmware as soon as it boots up, which is great. We're generally big proponents of over-the-air updates, but you have to do it securely. You have to sign firmware, you have to do HTTPS, etc. Yes.
For the cellular number, I'm guessing they're probably in chunks from the vendor, so that you
Right.
can.
So once you get one,
Yeah.
you're in the block.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that I kind of wrestled with is the fact that if you're, if you don't actually have the device, you're not going to be able to see the phone number on the serial port like I was able to do. How hard would it be to get that? But without detouring too much into the GSM hacking, when GSM starts up and connects, it sends what's called the IMSI, which but it's the equivalent of an IP address, or the phone number, the same way that IP address maps to DNS sort of. And there you can buy reverse lookups to look up the phone numbers of IMSIs. Would it be worth it to do play a prank on your neighbor? Probably not. Would it be worth it for a determined adversary who wanted access to track the car of somebody in the government? Probably. Yes.
Don't suppose there's any sort of database out there that you might be aware of that, maybe ties that phone number to a bin or anything like that? And then track that back to a user?
So that information would be in the database of the people that run this, because one of the first things that these devices do usually is grab the bin and send it up, have it kind of cloud back in and do that. But I don't know if it's sort of public place for those. And that brings up another point, which is we were not able to test any web backends of any of these because we were needing permissions, obviously, from the people that run the backend cloud servers. So probably vulnerabilities back there too, but yes.
follow-up question. Since you said it grabs the VIN, in theory, there is a way to fingerprint every vehicle then?
Yes, I'm not sure, I don't think that this stores the VIN locally, this configuration, so I'm not sure if it doesn't. So, yeah, there were some concerns about just the fact that regardless of whether you could like manipulate the car itself, or you could just fingerprint the car and be able to identify. And if nothing else, some of these have, like the Verizon one has a unique SSID, the access point. So once you've seen Verizon dash whatever four-digit number, then you know that's going to see car travel. So they actually manually changes the SSID.
It's broadcasting the SSID.
Sorry?
It's broadcasting the SSID, it's not a hidden SSID.
Oh, no, it's not good.
Yeah, they can.
Oh, sorry.
Yours, once you found the number, was there any documentation in the API or any of the other documentation you found online as far as the payload for the SMS messages, or was it just like trial and error?
No, it was all documented. They had a small amount of trial and error. Once I figured out like 16-bit versus 32-bit stuff. I didn't put examples of the messages because then you can Google those and you can find out who makes these devices and where they're deploying and stuff, which would kind of violate the promise not to say who it was. So. Okay, so some things that we did to mess around with the car. It's nothing like what Chris and Charlie did for the Jeep, so don't affect any wire or this or anything. So here's just a couple of examples of actual stuff that we sent to the Volt. So in this case, just to request the RPM, the current RPM. We did a set header. That header, I think, is the engine control module. Back says, okay, sounds good. And it's a pretty simple message, and it comes back and this is the long reply. Basically, this is so when I send a message to 70, it increments it by 8 when it replies, so that's why you get 78. 4 is type of message. 62 is this is 22. It increments that by 40 when it replies, so you get 62. The rest is just the message that you sent, so you know what this is the reply to. And then finally, a bunch of text, and there's like this long algorithm to figure out how, but this, thankfully, somebody did reverse engineer this, and I found it on the web form somewhere. But all that means it's going about 1,000. So obviously, this took a lot longer to actually figure out what that meant than just what we say. But, and just another example outside of ambient temperature, same kind of thing, send a message, and you get back 30 and a whole bunch of zeros. 0x30 times this algorithm, so we figured it out. Turns out to be about 46 and a half times. So this is just, I took an example of people had reverse engineered a lot of the codes already for the Chevy Volt, and here's just examples. There's probably 50 or 60 different data points like this that you can query from the Volt. But here's some of the more interesting ones. Even if I don't have one downloaded, I can send a text message to track it. If I have access to send these packets into the car, then I can still request the longitude, latitude, speed, all that kind of thing. Trip distance and time, the time while you're moving, the time while you're stationary. So you can imagine employers maybe wanting to know how much time your car is stationary. Like if you're on a FedEx delivery man and you've got 3 hours of stationary time during your 8-hour shift, you know, kind of wonder what the packages are getting there. Which, you know, it's legitimate for someone to use this on their employee if the employee knows what's happening and stuff. It's not legitimate. It's me doing it. DS drive without permission. So then I found even better ones on the Volt. This is a 29-bit can identifier, so they can be either 11 or 29, so that's why it's a lot longer. But once you set the header on this, you can start sending you these. These are pretty similar, but hey, you can send a message to unlock the front doors, lock all the doors again, unlock all the doors. So at this point, if nothing else, I know that I can break into my Volt and steal whatever's there. Which is not like crashing anything, but it's progress. And then I can also turn on and off the panic alarm, and I can start the car. And I was all excited about that at first. I was like, yes, I can steal my car. I'll unlock the door, we'll start the car, jump in, drive away. But start actually starts it in like accessory mode, so the heat and air conditioning comes on, and the radio comes on, but it won't actually allow you to start moving forward. I'm not sure if that's just because it's an electric car. I suspect it's not. I suspect all cars are like that. So my next project actually is to reverse engineer the message that gets sent when you use the real remote fob to send the unlock message. And see if I can send that message as well after I unlock it, so that I can actually start the car. Then I'll just steal it. So, did I ever make the car move like Chris and Charlie driving the Jeep down the freeway at 70 miles an hour? Not really. At one point I was sending a whole bunch of commands and the turn signal came on. I have no idea why, and I could not get it to come on again. So that was the closest I came to crashing the car, was turning the turn signal on once. But that was not really the focus of this. The focus of this was on whether these devices would allow you to affect the car, which pretty conclusively proved that they would. And we have a car for another years. So a few conclusions. So there's a bunch of potential impacts. Like you normally think, okay, somebody can hack my car, they can crash and nothing that. That's pretty bad. But there's a lot of other things, depending on the adversary, they might be more concerned about other things. So there has, long been an underground in trying to figure out how to unlock cars, just to steal the things that are in them, or to actually steal the car. So that just gets easier when you can do it from an iPhone app instead of having to, of course, engineer a key fob or something. Obviously, if you can control the car in any way, you can cause accidents or just cause a lot of cars to stop in a traffic jam or something. That's bad. That's going to hurt people. That's worse. Talked a little bit about tracking the vehicle. Potentially, all these cars have microphones in them for when you're doing Bluetooth with your headset or something. So you can potentially listen on microphones. Cameras. Most cars only have cameras, backup cameras at this point, but increasingly people are starting to put cameras in the cars for like insurance reasons, so that they can play back and find out if they were at fault or not. So being able to access that camera is uncomfortable. Once you're on the CAN bus, you can get to the IVI. So anybody that has had a rental car recently knows that you get in a rental car, the first thing it does is pair with your phone and say, do you want to download all your contacts into this rental car? So somebody could potentially steal that information, may or may not be a big deal. Talk about being able to compromise other mobile devices with the hotspots. I'm sure it's possible with other hotspots as well. Maybe my biggest concern is the one at the bottom here, which is that if I have a mobile device that can talk to Bluetooth or something, and I have one of these devices in my car all the time that talks to Bluetooth, if I compromise that mobile device, I now have something on the internet all the time that can talk to my car anytime, talk to the car anytime that cell phone is in it. So, first you're thinking, okay, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, you've got to be pretty close to do this, right? Like, if the car's going by you 70 miles an hour, you're not going to be able to pair with Bluetooth, cause the car to crash in a fraction of a second. No, but if you can get onto the cell phone that the person has in that car with them all day, every day, then potentially you can use the Bluetooth connection to cause a little more havoc. So I think that's probably a more likely attack vector than somebody just walking by or driving by your car with Bluetooth antenna or Wi-Fi antenna. So we released a vulnerability in the Blue Driver dongle that's up there last week. So some of the things that we want to do next, we're starting on the Volt, we're looking at the telematics stuff, so the remote management type things, the IVI itself, so what we can do with the cellular connection, with the satellite radio, that kind of thing. And then the OnStar app, there's lots of problems with OnStar already. This last year at FCON, making sure this WinStar, stuff like that. So we probably won't spend a lot of time on that since other people are doing it. It's interesting. And then just in general, some of the things we're starting to look into is just telematics kind of across the board. We've got a lot of people that are interested in whether there's problems with that. Like I said, we're working with SAE on an OBD-II security standard, so just basic things like allow diagnostic trouble codes, allow us what is required by law. Don't allow just random hand traffic to be passed through there because it could potentially cause the car to brake or accelerate or whatever. So how industry standards are those things. Vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure is very interesting. So this is all your cars starting in 2017, I think, are going to have what's called a DSRC, a digital short range communications, radio. And the idea of that is that your car can talk to all the cars around it and to all the things around it. So if you're coming to a construction zone, the sign says slow down for construction might also be sending a message out to all the cars coming toward it saying, hey, you should slow down now. So our question is, can you send messages that are not supposed to be sent? And Department of Transportation actually already has a test bed of this set up, and they built this big credential management system, and hopefully we can look at that and see if we can subvert what we've built so far. Preferably before it is actually out on the road. Self-driving cars, obviously that's like a playground right there. And then other classes of vehicles, so bad enough if you can control your four-door sedan, it's really bad if you can control a 18-wheeler or a platoon of 10 18-wheelers or something like that. So I guess that's it for my slides. If you want to come up later, there's a couple of dongles here that you can just look at. And then this is, so all this is a Raspberry Pi, but I found this came in really handy when doing this testing because it fits under the dashboard a lot better than a laptop. It's got the, obviously a Pi has the I/O pins on it. And it's got 4 USB and network. So this was really handy for like manually apps and connecting to a Bluetooth dongle with this and using it to connect to an app and then connecting pins, strings on chips and stuff. So I actually have a customized version of Raspberry that has a bunch of tools for doing like embedded reverse engineering and stuff, and we should have that out publicly here before too long. It's nothing special, it's just a whole bunch of tools like Raspberry, but still have to go through all of our lawyers before we release it. And that's all I brought. So, let's do some questions.
Yeah, I think I have a comment about your Bluetooth attack vector. You say that it's not that risky because you'd be going 70 miles per hour. No, that doesn't happen all the time, especially not in a city. Someone could easily probably just sneak a put a Bluetooth thing on their power box on the intersection, tap power from a stoplight or something.
Right.
So there's plenty of chances for someone to compare then pull the stoplights like up to like 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've actually thought about going like down by the Fort Pitt tunnels or something at rush hour and just sitting there with the Bluetooth.
Oh, that'd be a perfect spot actually.
Yeah, I mean because everybody's going like 1 mile an hour, so we have plenty of time. So yeah, that's definitely true. It is a risk. You know, I think my point there was that a lot of people say, "Oh, well, that's not a risk because you can drive it by quickly." You're right. It's a risk, both in general and if you have to talk to people. Yes.
Have you looked at any of the ODB or CAN bus adapters for the Arduino before I go to order one this weekend?
Not really. So I was actually just reading today about the TAN triple, and it looks interesting, but I just haven't gotten around to buying one.
The reason I ask is I have a Dodge 2013 with the electric shifter.
Oh yeah.
So you can put it in drive, reverse, or park electronically because there's no mechanical linkage.
Ah, that's cool.
So my first question is, when can I make that work?
Right, yeah. Right. One of the interesting cars, I wish I could afford one, is the Infinity Q60, I think. It's all drive-by-wire, so except maybe the parking brake. So accelerator and everything, it's all CAN messages, or maybe the drive messages. Yes.
You guys looked into, there's this, I don't know if there's other aftermarket ones like it, but it's called iData Link Maestro. It's for third-party stereos. Basically, you wire it to the CAN. I think it gives you 2 pins to wire it to per manufacturer, and then it has a harness that then plugs into your aftermarket stereo. Then you can see your climate control or some of those things, which I would imagine would be your weak link. Then would be the head unit could then talk back to the CAN, which could then I don't know if you guys have looked into that.
We haven't, so I've actually kind of wondered, I've replaced stereos in my older cars in years past, and now that the head unit is so integrated with the network, I kind of wondered how useful is it to actually try to replace that. So that doesn't surprise me that people create it, but we haven't looked at it yet. I think I have one question back here real quick. No, I'm right over here. Yes.
When you said you had trouble getting it to do more than turn on the blinker, was that because you couldn't get the ODB device to pass on road traffic if you had full unrestricted access to the CAN network?
It was more because it passes so much traffic that trying to figure out what does a specific thing takes a lot of time, and it was just a little bit outside of our scope.
So if you could write directly to the CAN bus, you could definitely do more.
Yeah. And when you figure, when Chris and Charlie did the Jeep, they reverse engineered the CAN bus for a year before they could get it to totally end of the stuff. So it was more just time and amount of traffic. Yes?
I was going to say, I replaced the Uconnect radio in my Dodge Wall.
Oh, you did?
And it's 2 screws and it pops off to get to the radio, and you have full access to all the CAN buses going in and out of the radio. So I went from one of the older radios without an nav system to one that has a nav system. And one of the options they gave me was the plug to fake it having one on the phone. So it thinks it has one, but it's just a dead end plug in it. That's an hour in the out part of one.
Very easy.
Your list of plug-in devices for the OBD-II board include something called Automatic Link. Is that the one from automatic.com?
Yes.
Because they talk a lot about their security and how they designed it with security in mind. And I was wondering if their claims stood up to your analysis.
So that was one of the better ones. We didn't find any glaring vulnerabilities in it. We think we can probably brute force the Bluetooth. That the firmware updates were signed. There's no authentication to download the firmware, but at least they were signed and it didn't seem to work. We tried to actually enforce the signature when we loaded the firmware. So aside from possibly being able to brute force the Bluetooth pin, we didn't really find any vulnerabilities in that one. So I mean, I will say off the record that the automatic and the OBD link are the two that we found that decent security. Unsurprisingly, they're the most expensive.
So does that mean I should like remove that part of the recording?
Nah, it's just not Cert's opinion, it's mine.
Okay.
Yes, in the back there.
So I just had some thoughts. Like, if I was creating an app, it would obviously help if I isolate my commands to the car, and then the radio like the fixed setting, so no like custom thing comes across. Signed components for like all of the signed updates for all components of the app. Are there any other like bits and tips there that can like assist in creating like just at least my app can be used?
Yeah, so one of the things we did for this was actually we turned it into language that the government can use when they're buying these things. So they can say, hey, we want these security features. So you just need two biggest ones, which is that it shouldn't be able to pass any random commands. It shouldn't be able to pass commands that are predefined. And if you sign the firmware so that people can't change that behavior, then you've gone a long way. Other things are pretty minor, like to pick a unique good password, use SSL for their updates, things like that. Don't give it access to anything more than what it needs to do its job. So does this really need to connect to the OBD-II port for anything other than power? In a lot of cases, we had one device actually that didn't plug into the OBD-II port. It did a lot of the same tracking features and stuff like that, but it used an onboard GPS and things like that, and it was solar power, it just stuck to the windshield. So it gave you 90% of the functionality with nothing to risk. Of course, you can't get the actual real miles per gallon. So that was one of the recommendations is think about what you're trying to actually get out of this device. It's not easy. Some of the devices, we actually had one device where they had clipped off the pins of the connector for the protocols that they didn't use, which also seems like a very if you only need CAN, there's no sense in having a pin there for GM.
What would you say are some of the risks of playing with this sort of stuff on your own vehicle, like burning out an ECU? Can you print
Yeah, I mean, you could certainly damage an ECU or something else in the car, and you have to get it towed to the shop and get it repaired. I think the bigger risk is if you thought about, well, let's just start fuzzing the CAN bus. And we'll just start sending everything off to the and we thought about where the car is going to go if we accidentally send the accelerating command. And decided the CAD lawyers probably wouldn't be too happy with us doing that one. So I think that's the bigger risk is hurting yourself.
So what you're saying is if I get you a forklift and I can lift it off the ground, you'll fuzz it?
Sure. Yeah. If I put it up on a good lift, then yes.
Nice.
We're happy to. Or, if we can put it in a safe place where we can test them. But this garage right on Forbes Avenue, all the students walking by, great places. And there's a cliff right behind the parking lot. Yes.
You said that there was a URL for the firmware that you were able to point it to, an arbitrary URL. Are any of these doing OTA just all the time looking for new firmware, or?
So certainly that one that I talked about was the SMS stuff. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
As soon as we could boot it, we could see it saying, looking for new firmware at this URL, and checking version or things like that.
So some of them are.
Some of them are cheap ones, certainly they're not.
Yeah.
The cheap $10 that I was talking about, there's no updated firmware to really change the password.
Okay.
So there a question over here somewhere?
Did we talk about DDoS and DDoS to the network?
Yeah.
What happens?
So the results are undefined in any standards. I would imagine you probably could shut down ECUs and things if you could send that much traffic. My guess is that none of these devices or device will get DDoS before maintaining the car will get DDoS. But if you had high-speed USB connected to a cable directly to the OBD-II port, I would imagine that if you just was DDoS. That's one, actually a common way to do CAN attacks, like if you watch some of Chris and Charlie's stuff, is to just send fake packets way more often than real packets. And therefore, if the wheels recording the speed is 10 miles an hour back to the speedometer, and you just send it 60 miles an hour 100 times as fast, then it's 60 miles an hour. Tiny window into the real numbers.
Have you looked at things like fleet vehicles? I mean, the government has passed a lot of regulations in the past year that requires very much of that data to be collected for fleet vehicles.
So the requirement for the fleet vehicles, the executive order that requires that was passed, and the RFPs went out before this work got started. So none of that requirement is in contracts now. However, we did work on people that applied to the RFP, and that's why we were putting input into it. And we think that the solutions for the government are going to be fair minimum security levels. The next RFP is going to have our language in it that says this is what we should do.
So are you working with the
No. So far only DOT and GS did that. We are looking at other fleet vehicles. Not necessarily cars.
Is there any possibility that they're going to be changing the regulations that require these to be so open?
So we talked about that at an event that I was at a week or two ago, and there are suggestions of different ways to do it. Like you could still modify the firmware on your ECU that was probably marked as tainted, and therefore other components might not trust it to the same degree you normally would. There's of course people who just say it's too dangerous to let people mess around with the ECU from the cars, and we should stop to that. I know people are working with policymakers on trying to promote some of these issues, and it's possible that they'll push changes, but you know how fast that's going to happen. I mean, it's great that we're working with the Department of Transportation, but I don't think it's going to cause any change to the regulations soon.
Well, I know we went through a presentation, but the GM guy said, their hands are really tied based on the regulations that say that, everything I have to be open.
I mean, this is the Senate, maybe we should come to them all now. The Senate in me says that it's not really going to happen until people are hurt. Yes.
So you talked about attacking items on the bus. Would it be possible to attack like the ODB-II reader, for example, like the progressive snapshot, and tell it, hey, I haven't moved my vehicle in 3 months. My rate should probably come down again.
Yeah. So as a matter of fact, there's actually forums out on the internet for how to trick your progressive snapshot into showing that you're not driving as much as you are. So yes, it's absolutely possible. I think all they're really doing is blocking the traffic from the bus, so it's not getting. I started the car right over somebody has that.
Gotcha.
Yes.
We were just talking about U.S.-related regulations, but there are many jurisdictions around the world. Do you happen to know anything about places like the EU or China or Japan or India, or what are they requiring of their cars? What kind of hackability aspects do those cars have based on those requirements?
Right. I probably don't have. I probably can't speak too intelligently about this.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'll say that most of the cars inside are made the same way.
Right. Exactly.
There is a similar standard to OBD-II in the EU called EOB or EOB something like that. So they have similar requirements.
The EU requires similar stuff,
Right.
but the cars there.
Yes.
Okay.
So I don't know how similar the protocol is to the requirements to the US.
Right. Okay. So the attacks that we're developing in America may map pretty well onto European cars.
They probably do. They probably have to change our format a little bit of the messages.
All right.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, oh, we got one.
Are there things that would differ between like gas, electric, diesel models? Like, is there anything that would differ, with what you're doing?
Yes and no. So some of the stuff, like sending a message that the accelerator was pressed, the car is going to treat that as the same regardless of whether that car was an electric engine or a diesel engine or whatever. When you get a little bit farther into it, Brian, did you just turn me on?
I did.
So once you get a little bit farther in, then there's definitely going to be, depending on what you want to do with the car, like, we wondered, like, what can you do? Can you shut off the battery itself or something in Chevy Bolt? Something that wouldn't be possible with a gas engine. So the basics are going to be the same. Like I said, underneath are going to be different. So I don't know how much diesel will be different. There might be some different parameters that we could request. I have one of the Volkswagen diesels, so I'm bleeding like mad. So I should probably do a little more research on that.
So regarding that question, I was wondering if you could clarify something you mentioned earlier about the Teslas having ODB-IIs that you can plug into but aren't wired to anything. I thought we were just talking about how they're required.
So this was sort of anecdotal, talking to the guy from Tesla over drinks, but Mark Rogers that did Tesla hacks last year at DEF CON, so I was talking to him and he just said that they're required to have the OBD-II port, and so they do, but in the back the wires are just sitting, so they don't exist, they don't connect to anything. So I assume that that's legal because there's no emissions, because the OBD-II was originally required for emissions related things, so since there's no gas engine, I don't have to worry about it, but like I said, this was kind of an offhand comment, so.
Just a note, I actually purchased a new GM vehicle a couple weeks ago, and when I was signing the papers, what's that?
Can we hack it?
Sure. It's a couple of parking lots down, but they actually had me sign a thing through OnStar, which is of course a service that I opted into. That said I would not reverse engineer, I would not try to bypass any of the safety mechanisms, et cetera, which is getting a step towards what you were saying as far as what the right to tinker and whatnot. I don't know if that's...
So the counter to that is that as of December 2015, there were copyright exceptions. So every 3 years they review what's exempt from the DMCA copyright protections. And in December they added the ability to reverse engineer cars. So you're now not violating the DMCA by reversing the car. Whether that frees you from a contractual thing when you sign the bonds,
Yeah.
Lawyers. Better hacking code than any of the laws, that's for sure. Anyone else? If not, I'll put down the microphone and just hang out if anyone has any questions. I'm happy to answer them. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.